States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Glad to have a crowd. Important topics tonight and a lot to do, so let's get started. We will look at our minutes for the meeting we had last week for the Board of Ed presentation. Any comments or material edits we need to make? The only thing I'd say is at the end where we talk about debt service and capital update, the health insurance fund was actually sort of a separate item, but I have no problem with the way this is presented. So. We fine with the minutes as written?
Yes.
All right, so motion,
So moved.
Second.
all in favor say aye. Aye. All right, so the order of business tonight is the Board of Selectmen's 2019-2020 proposed operating capital budget presentation, and then subsequent discussion. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me. As you all know, but for folks at home, I'm Sean Askin. I'm the Board of Selectmen Finance Liaison. First Selectman Eric Wellman asked me to do this presentation tonight in his absence. He's traveling on business and regrets not being here. We have Chris Peterson and Cheryl Cook from the Board of Selectmen as well. So just want to acknowledge those folks, and obviously all of the town staff here. We appreciate you all being here as we go through this discussion, and they'll make sure that I'm honest and straightforward with the numbers. And we had great discussions through our nearly 10-hour budget hearing a couple of Saturdays ago, and I really appreciated all their input. Obviously, Maria Capriola, Amy Merriweather, and Melissa as well did a phenomenal job putting this budget together. It's really the first full budget year that our professional management has had. And in my 8 years, this is my 8th budget. I've had the privilege of working with Lisa and Maura and some other folks on budgets. I think each budget has gotten more transparent in different ways, improved, and I see this one as once again another step forward in trying to make sure that we're disclosing not only to the Board of Finance but to the taxpayers what are we paying for in terms of core services, why are we paying for it, and again, where are our priorities, where are the potential increases in service and potential decreases in service as well. So with that, we'll go through it. As I'm sure you don't need an invitation to, please feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. Obviously, this is your meeting, and we are here to inform you. So we'll go forward from there. So first and foremost, this slide is in here for my friend Lisa, because she always reminded me that we have to ground ourselves in what are we here for? What's the Board of Selectmen's role? What's the town's role in providing core services? Obviously, public safety, infrastructure, quality of life, strong financial management and discipline. Obviously, you folks do a great job of that. Economic development, recreation, library, and senior and social services. So, again, just a little bit of a graphic representation with some pictures of, again, what are we all here for? This is what we're talking about. We're talking plow drivers, police officers, parks and recreation. So when we get into the numbers, again, just wanted to put some context behind it. As again, I know you all know very well and ask the thoughtful questions, but for the folks at home, this is what we're providing with your tax dollars. Lisa used to always do a great job with the cup of coffee analogy for how much of each of the pie comes up, but again, I left that one out, but thought again that we would start here. So with that, Amy, we'll get to the numbers.
You're never going to live that down,
Say
Lisa.
nothing.
I don't. It's a fair representation. So again, you're going to see a number of almost 24 million, the town operating budget here, as you've all seen. It does not include the cash for capital, debt service, or proposed teachers' retirement system assessment. We've accounted for those elsewhere, as you are fully aware of. When you get down to an apples-to-apples budget, and we'll go through that, we're looking at a 4.75% increase. Which we'll go through. Again, it reflects us, the total increase reflects us moving the Simsbury Farm Special Revenue Fund into the general fund. This is a change, Rob and others. As you know, we've talked about this issue for a number of years. This issue being how do we make the revenue fund solvent. This is one proposed solution. Certainly, it's not the only one, but it's one that we attempted to solve this year. And as we talked about at our budget hearing with Tom and with the rest of staff and the Board of Selectmen, We wanted to move off the focus of the solvency of the fund and move back to the focus of recreation. We haven't necessarily increased recreation funding in this town in a long time. As we continue to acquire open space, we need to manage that space, and this was a way to, at least in our estimation, to get that conversation moving forward. The accounting changes, so what you'll see in the budget book is actually a 15.93% increase, again, with the expenditure budget without the offsetting revenue. So Amy can do a far better job than I can of explaining what that means. But at the end of the day, the budget is only up 4.75% on a year-over-year basis. So we'll move on. So from a budget driver standpoint, again, while the debt service is not in the Board of Selectmen budget, it is the third line item from driving the mill rate. And again, wanted to point out that we're looking at a 21.2% increase in the debt service category, as we've all discussed previously. Obviously, you folks and our board is aware of the major medical line item and the potential challenges that we have there in terms of fund solvency. From a year-over-year basis, we're looking at roughly a 23.5% increase. Again, as we talked about last time, the premiums were set too low. There's been a 15% increase in stop-loss insurance. We're not at the recommended fund levels, and obviously your board is certainly capable of deciding what the right reserve there is. And we've got to look at the overall accounting for the special revenue fund as well. And then we'll move on.
John,
Yes, ma'am, fire away.
The 600,000, is that just for your budget, or is that yours and Board of Ed?
I believe that is every, that's just ours? That's just ours.
Do you have copies of this for us?
Printed or not?
I don't.
The presentation? Yeah. Well, it's just easier to take notes as we go along, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Sure.
My arthritic hip doesn't have-
You want me to keep going, or you want me to talk about something?
Keep going.
Keep going.
I can talk about something else.
So can you just go back one, Sean?
Yes.
Since we've interrupted you.
No, good.
Are you going to break out the apples to apples without the revenue fund? What would the increase be?
On the major medical?
Yes.
That I do not know off the top of my head.
I could break it out, but it won't be quick. I can do it when you guys are last conversation.
Because that's not either of the scenarios we talked about last week, correct?
Yes, it's the 10.44 scenario.
Yeah.
All right.
For purposes of the public watching this meeting, and for me also, how does the Simsbury Farm Special Revenue Fund fall under health insurance?
I mean, we have employees down there that we have to.
So it's related to the
Yes.
employees okay.
But the $600,000 includes an increment that involves including the employees who weren't previously in the comparable. So we're doing a 23% increase, only a portion of which, that doesn't represent a true year-to-year
Right.
apples to apples.
Right.
Correct.
So there's actually a few things in that line. There's not only the health insurance, we have our retiree health insurance, we have our HSA funding, we have our employee assistance program. There's more things in that line item other than just health insurance. And then in addition to that, we have the true up for the shared positions for the Board of Ed, we have the Simsbury Farms. So that's where you're seeing the 23.5%.
All right, let's keep going, and we probably have to come back to that.
Okay. Absolutely. So budget drivers, obviously like to keep you apprised of where we're talking about here. So contractual increases, as we talk about every year, are the primary driver in our budget increases. As you know, we have 5 of the 6 contracts being negotiated in the upcoming year. Therefore, we have a contingency reserve budgeted because at this point, we do not know how those contracts will come out. It also, I believe, includes the negotiations for the previous or recently closed police contract as well. We have step increases for the police officers, anticipated medical leave coverage and dispatch. Again, we know there's a leave coming, so we need to plan for that accordingly because we obviously, was it last year or 2 years ago, we changed the dispatch to increase the dispatch level. So in order to maintain service, we have to plan for that. As we've talked about in the past, one of my favorite topics on the Board of Selectmen, the MS4 stormwater requirements. is an increase of $27,000. It's an unfunded state mandate. Again, there are requirements that we have to meet, sweeping streets, other drainage, clearing, et cetera, to make sure that the water that goes into the Farmington River, which is clearly important, needs to be clean, and we need to follow the state rules on that. I've always questioned whether other municipalities have or not, but for our business tonight, that is not the matter at hand. Additional budget drivers, police overtime. We continue to have challenges in the police overtime space. No fault to the police department, but as retirements and departures happen, continuing to staff that department has required an increase in overtime. So the chief and Maria have looked at what the appropriate numbers based on their estimations were, and there's a budget increase there. There's also a substantial budgeted increase, again, for the Social Security and Medicare payments, as well as liability insurance.
We'll come back to those later.
Yes, ma'am. I will start so that we do not forget it. And then again, Culture, Parks, and Rec, as we talked about previously, we're essentially moving $3.3 million out of the special revenue fund and requesting that it all but be shut down. There's one caveat to that, and that we move the recreation services out of that special revenue fund into the general operating budget. The one caveat to that, just want to make the board's attention aware of, is we have instituted a surcharge for the rounds of golf down at the farms, with an understanding that that surcharge would be dedicated towards small capital projects, maintaining the golf course. So that is an item that we don't want to get lost in all of that, because it is part of the approved fee schedule at this point. So if the revenue fund were to be shut down, there would need to be a smaller revenue fund or additional one set up, similar to what we've done in the Culture, Parks, and Rec Fund in the past. If you remember years ago, in working with our sports teams, and Tom can talk about this better, but our sports teams pay into a special fund that goes towards line painting and grass cutting, other additional items.
Miscellaneous agricultural supplies needed for upkeep on the sports fields.
So just, again, it really essentially no different than that. So again, a small item, but an important one that we don't want to get lost no matter how we choose to deal with the special revenue fund or not. So, questions on that?
Lots of questions.
We'll come
but
back
yeah, we'll come
to
back.
that.
You're being kind. I appreciate it. I have not felt well for the last 2 days, hence the water. So again, we told you that, again, in the interest of transparency and no knock on prior budgets, there are many ways to present budgets. We've tried to show you the true cost of the shared services with the Board of Ed. So you're seeing what's quote-unquote increases in the IT budget, the school resource budget, ground maintenance, engineering services. These are increases because we are taking the full load of the expenditure in the Board of Selectmen budget and offsetting it with a transfer from the Board of Education versus the 50-50 sharing of those salaries that we've done in the past. So
I will stop you there. So then how does that fit into your guys' budget? Are you showing
That was my
the
question.
revenue and the expense? What?
We include our shared portion in.
Net or
as an
gross?
expenditure, 'cause it's an expenditure. Net.
Okay. Maria, you want to speak to that?
Sure. So what we have found during this budget season is on the town side, we weren't, these particular expenditures, we weren't actually reflecting them as an expenditure or as a revenue during budget development. It was simply being done back office through, I believe, journal entries at some point towards year end. But again, we felt for transparency purposes, these are legitimate, town expenses. We do have incoming revenues from the Board of Ed. So the net impact to the budget, it's actually, there is no net impact. But again, for transparency, we felt it was important to show and demonstrate that these are actual expenses that the town has, and these are the incoming revenues we have to offset those particular services.
So I'll make this general comment here. I struggled over the weekend trying to do apples to apples or comparable to comparable, and frankly gave up. And I think that if, I had a boss a long time ago that said it's hard to look cool when the world's changing around you very fast, and so that's true. But I think we need to work together these are admirable things that we're trying to change, but we're trying to do it in a way that we get to the point where the transparency increases confidence in the budget from one period to the other. So I think you're probably going to get a series of questions tonight
about comparable, going back and comparing the 1920 budget to the 1819 budget as if you had made this transparency switch last year, so that we don't get hung up on a 23% increase in a budget, which is only really 4.75.
Yep.
All right?
And we absolutely
So-
have those numbers for you.
And it's hard to talk through all of that, but that's really what a lot of tonight is going to be done, I think, when we get down to asking a lot of questions, so, all right?
Yeah,
There were a lot of changes, a lot of changes that didn't, I couldn't make the math
Yeah.
add on a million different details.
And it does seem to me that
And there were
if-
no footnotes explaining why something went up
it
5,000%.
was hard to follow, cold, I have to
The
say.
opposite of transparent.
Well,
Does it make sense to be sure this is reflexive? In other words, that if you're going to change it here, it should be, they should show it in the Board of Ed budget the same way, so that it's, let me ask it a different way. Is the IT salary an obligation of the town to pay the salary?
Right, right. So these employees have a home base with the town. So.
So you pay the entire payroll of the 226, it's through the town's payroll.
Right, so they're being paid as a town employee, right? And the difficulty wasn't on the Board of Ed side. They were showing it for budgeting purposes in their budget document. It was on our side. We weren't showing those expenses or revenues in the budget document anywhere. So it was sort of on our.
But net, the amount, the total, everything was, I mean, we spent 226,000, it just showed up in $213,000 pieces, one on one budget, one on another, assuming 50/50, I'm just saying.
Right, so it showed up on the Board of Ed budget. It wasn't actually showing up on the town budget. It was, again, being done sort of back office accounting.
But when we did our P and L at the end of the year, there was a $113,000 net expense at the town.
Yeah.
It wasn't lost.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
no, but in the budget book that you all got, it was shown only as a 50% cost. to the
So
Board
it
of
was the
Selectmen.
net rather than the gross.
It was the net, right.
And we all understood that when we talked about the engineering position, the school resource officer position, we negotiated with Matt and with Burke to make sure that we were funding those positions in the best way possible.
Okay.
Showed the true expense.
Yeah.
The Board of Selectmen budget has always showed the true expense of those. It just didn't show the full expense plus the revenues. It showed the net.
Correct. We're actually, I know it's confusing at this point. This is why we've laid out these changes. We are trying to be very transparent with it because we know it's challenging. But at the end of the day, we didn't want people to think, all right, you're only spending, 91,000 on a resource officer. That's not accurate. The town is spending 181,000. And they would have to have a financial degree to go in and look at the financials and figure out where all the spending is happening.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'll want to come back to this later, but I want to let you finish your presentation.
yes, ma'am. All right, so once again, to add what we think is transparency, but perhaps confusion, there's grants that we received, correct, for Dial Ride, for the Housing Authority and for the VNA contribution. So again, with the same thinking, budgeting the entire expenditure for those with a corresponding revenue item in the revenue side. So again, no cost increase in actuality to the Board of Selectmen budget or the town budget, just accounting for it differently.
And is that true of all of these bullets, or just the first two? What's grounds maintenance is 100% increase. So where was that expense before?
So that was paid 100% by the schools, but they're a town employee.
So there's an equal reduction in the school budget then?
Expenditure,
We're
right?
just showing the
Right.
expenditures, which are not changing.
We're now showing the expenditures and the
And
offsetting revenue.
Okay. And engineering service, these are all that, in that category.
And that's the
Expenses paid by the town, but distributed between the two budgets and not offset by revenue. And that's going to be fixed universally?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, I mean, I think moving forward, yes, we identified all of those areas in which that was occurring and tried our best to clean it all up in one shot.
Ironically, we had budgeted the way you wanted when we hired the new building inspector with Bloomfield.
Yes.
And so this is just truing up the way we did Bloomfield with everything else. And it probably came to light because we did Bloomfield and we said, oh, why are we doing it this way here and not with everything else?
Okay.
Great example, actually.
That's the extent of the shared
No, keep going.
expenses in total?
I believe so.
I'm just asking, is that the full extent of the shared services?
Not Bloomfield, but Bloomfield's
No,
already.
yeah.
That's already, yeah,
Right.
as Lisa pointed out, that's already accounted for correctly.
And these are only between the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen?
Board of Ed in the town, correct?
Yeah, in the town, okay.
Not at the bottom though, the dial-a-ride, the housing authority, and the BNA
Right.
are different.
Those are offset by grants, correct?
By
Right.
grants.
Right, so the dial-a-ride program, the full
So we had
cost-
been showing those expenses net of the grant
Yes.
and not showing the revenue.
Right.
Okay.
So under the same theory, showing you the true cost with the corresponding revenue
Okay.
offset. Therefore, it looks like our budget is increasing, but if you account for the revenue that comes in, there is no increase.
Okay.
So Amy, is that 11,500 for the housing authority, the item you told me today shows up in the
That was
line
netted
of
against-
community services?
Yes. It was previously netted against the revenue.
Okay.
So there is revenue to cover that, but it's in community services, so it looks like that was very confusing. I don't think it was-
Having fun yet, Sean?
I'm having a ball.
Can I ask a
going.
question?
It's a lot to take in. It was a lot for us to take in the first time too. There's a lot of changes. We appreciate that.
So the dial-a-ride as an example, the increase is really the shortfall of the grant to cover the full expense?
What was budgeted?
We have two sorry, I'm getting over a cold. We have two sources of grant revenue for that particular program. One is a grant that comes from the state of Connecticut, and one is a grant or contribution, if you will, that comes from the Greater Hartford Transit District. So those two sources of grant revenue are the 42,000. So that is grant revenue, again, that was incoming, contributing to that.
None of these here represent actual net increases.
Correct.
These are only transparency increases.
The only caveat to that would be if any of these salaries increased contractually. Correct.
So how would we know the difference? Like, what is the net total versus what is contractual increases? How would we see that?
Maybe, if I'm understanding the question correctly, maybe the supplemental tab that shows changes, is that?
So if it's a net, so we have a revenue coming in, and we budget part of it, and we get some of the revenue back. So we budget the whole thing, we get some back. But salaries increase over year, so we don't see the year-to-year comparison in the book, so we can't tell how much of that is, oh, it's just normal 2%
Right.
salary increases versus the whole combination. So how would we know that, I guess is the
So
question.
again, with our town staff, only the police contract is, well, now settled, but at the time of budget preparation, it was not settled. So, again, at the time of budget preparation, we did not have 1920 salary numbers for folks, so we do have funds budgeted in contingency for anticipated wage settlements.
So that was flat.
Right, so in that regard, it would be flat for current year because of that uniqueness of having the contracts that we have to negotiate.
So I was going to wait to ask this, but since we're on this topic for so long, I may as well go into the weeds here. So if you look on tab 11, as an example, the one you've talked about already, IT, the recommended amount is 226,463. And it seems to be saying that that's because there's $113,000 of revenue that comes from the Board of Ed, presumably. Except when you go to the next page, which shows the IT technology revenue budget and the charges to the Board of Ed, what's in the recommended budget is $153,000, and what's in the Board of Selectmen budget is $170,000. How do those numbers square?
Sure, so the $153,000 from the Board of Ed, they also contribute to the benefits for that particular two positions that they help support. So part of that revenue is then also going to the benefits accounts. So for example, pension, health insurance, again, they're helping to fund not only the salary, but also the benefits associated with that.
So that's on a different line,
Correct.
somewhere
Part of
else,
that
on
is, right,
some
part
other
of that is the
page.
health insurance and part of that.
This is why we need footnotes. If you're gonna, I mean, when you don't have things add up like this, how would we possibly be able to figure that out?
Part of it is to have this discussion as well.
Well-
Because that's how we learned about it as well, was having the budget hearing and having the discussion.
We wouldn't need to take everybody's time so much if we have little notes about this. So, and what's the difference between, why did the Board of Selectmen add another $17,000 to this?
That was the change in the health insurance rates. We originally estimated a 9% increase, and then we did a 10.44% increase.
Thank you.
If you hang with me, I promise I'll show you where we added to the budget.
All right.
There's 3 places where we actually did. 2,
Okay.
3, I promise you.
I'm sure you got a lot of those.
Oh, there's a ton of these, yeah. There's no way for us to have understood any of this in advance.
Okay.
So here's where we added to the budget. So we've talked about for a number of years, I believe our auditors have recommended for as long as I've been around, continuing to add to our fiscal expertise. And at this point, we have recommended a shared accounting position with the Board of Education. We feel that that's an important place to invest in, and while, yes, technically it is an increase from a staffing standpoint, we don't look at this as a service enhancement. This is a service necessity. Our finance staff is having to grab from either assistant town manager responsibilities, benefits manager responsibilities, and it's simply not a position where we can continue to understaff. Mistakes are not being made, thank God, because we have the professionals we do. But these folks can tell you about things that are not happening that perhaps should be happening or that we would like to have happen. And again, from an internal control standpoint, we simply do not have enough staff to have, from an accounting standpoint, a basic level of internal control segregation of duties in place. So it's important that we continue to look at this position.
I would say I agree with you on that, and it is a very important position. It's my understanding the Board of Ed has not added the other half to their budget. Is that correct? You're gonna-
In any event, this was really is $106,000 increase. And if approved by the Board of Ed, would have an offsetting.
Correct.
You're catching on.
I am. I'm quick on the uptake. All right.
See? We're getting it. Trust me, it took me about 8 hours to get all this. You guys are getting it in a half an hour, so you're ahead of me.
No, we've spent 4 days like poring over this. It's.
Yes, ma'am, I have, I take this budget book to work with me. The second item is a reinstatement of 4 hours to the administrative position in the library. Can't impress upon you enough, again, how important this is. We've heard from Lisa Crean, our library director, and the library board. Again, it's only $5,600. However, it would make a substantial change because unfortunately Lisa's having to do a substantial amount of administrative work down there as a result of prior cuts. And we thought that this was a place that we could continue to restore some service down at the library and have the library director focused on leading the library versus some of the more administrative tasks that were happening down there. The third item is the economic development, branding, and marketing materials. I believe we did this, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. So this has come around again as those materials age, as we focus on economic development. We did want to recommend putting this funding in there to refresh not only the content, but also the printing of that material. We're working with our partners in Main Street to see if we can lower that number. But it is something, as we focus on economic development, the board felt strongly about including from a service standpoint.
So can you talk a little bit more about what those materials are, how they're used? I mean, the notion of paper printed materials and coming up with a new brand name when we just did it 5 years ago agonizingly. Just doesn't warm the cockles of my heart.
So this was one of the 4 main tasks of Board of Selectmen gave to the newly reconvened Economic Development Commission was to, in an effort to support entrepreneurs, was to also though to really look at refreshing again the marketing and branding materials. So part of that is the design for the marketing and branding materials, and then the actual printing. It's often used with people who are interested in starting a business in town. My understanding it's been widely used by realtors in town when the materials are current and up to date. So those are a couple of examples of folks that this information has been distributed to in the past. I would maybe defer to Mike as well in terms of additional comments on that.
Is it shared at all with Simsbury Main Street Partnership?
So they are assisting with this project, so they have been assisting us to staff the new EDC. And we have, again, four work teams on the EDC, and she is staffing this particular work team that's working on this initiative. Oh, it's 10 years old, thank you, they're 10 years old at this point.
So that's why they're gonna make sure I get the numbers right. I'll come back to that one, or you guys good? Keep going? All right, so in the lens of continuing to make sure that we're looking not only at service improvements, but where can we make changes to use the town's dollars wisely, we did, through consultation with the town manager and the Parks and Rec director, recommend an elimination of a full-service supervisor position. And that position, I believe, primarily works with staffing camps and the camp programs. It's been determined that we can provide an adequate level of service with part-time hours versus the full-time, which results in a $62,000 annual savings there. So from a position-to-position basis, trying to stay neutral as we look at the accounting position and otherwise. So not just asking for increases, also looking at places that we can make changes. We believe that this will help us cut the deficit. Again, if the special revenue fund were to stand out on its own still, that reduction would come from there, but having it merged into the operating budget, we wanted to disclose it at this point.
So besides moving the fund, the special revenue fund, expenses and revenue into the general fund, what other actions have been taken relative to the Parks and Rec Department?
We've continued to work with Tom and the Culture and Parks and Rec team on what are the adequate fees to charge down there. The golf revenues were looked at again this year. I believe there was a number of places where they did go up including the season passes.
Season pass is held the same.
Excuse me, you're right.
We went to a we're going to a one rate schedule used at basically private courses. So everybody's, basically walking up, everybody's gonna pay the same rate. There's really not a difference between residents and non-residents anymore at this point. So our residents will see somewhat of an increase this year, going to that. So that's basically our increase for this year on the rates. But it's a strategy being used at other municipal courses. Rockledge is going that direction. Of course, in Berlin, I believe, went in that direction. We're just trying to stay competitive in the marketplace with what we have. We're going to try some more different promotions this year to try to bring some more folks in to the course and, different marketing. We're trying everything. We're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this, trying to make it work. And you spent time benchmarking those rates. We did. We benchmarked our rates against the comparable courses in the area. So.
And the programs and all the rest have taken a hard look at it. Those changes in this budget?
Yes. The reason that, I don't want to get too far into this, it's not the program, it's not the programs, to some extent, not even the golf course that's causing the deficit. It's the salaries and benefits that are there. If the recreation department's a town service, like the library or the senior center, we wouldn't be having to cover all of our salaries, all of our benefits. That's really where this came from a long time ago. And you know that.
We completely understand.
So essentially again, we can look at this a lot of different ways through a lot of lenses, Rob, but by merging it into the general fund, we've eliminated that debate.
You've eliminated what?
That debate, because the Culture, Parks and Rec,
You've eliminated the debate, right?
yes.
You've hidden it all.
We have not hidden it. It's a question of how does this town want to fund recreation, and this is a recommendation on how would we want to fund it. Because we can get bogged down in, is Tom and staff and benefits, is it worth $250,000 in the rec fund budget? Is it
I understand.
125? I don't know what the right number is, and
John speaks also, it's not being hidden, let's be clear.
Yep.
We're also trying to be more transparent. We're also, Amy's gonna be breaking out the golf course operations into much more of a line item, so it can be seen to see truly how it's operating. So let's be careful with how we.
we've been assured that we can continue to monitor camp fees, swimming fees, golf fees, so that we're not letting go of what the revenues are down there. And again, this is one of many proposed solutions that could be on the table. But as we step back and look at recreation in this community, the Board of Selectmen felt strongly that this was a way to move it forward and stop the annual allocation debate.
So again, can we, is there an analysis of the Parks and Rec budget after and before, as if it had been blended in? Is that analysis in the book?
Sure, so we have looked at it a couple of different ways. In the manager's proposed budget, which is available online, we took a slightly different approach, and we consolidated the entire department into the special revenue fund. So part of this too was trying to account for all of the department expenses in one place, because we had multiple program budgets within the general fund, we had the special revenue fund, so we had taken a slightly different approach, and originally had shown it, again, in this, all expenses in the general fund. The Board of Selectmen took, again, a different approach, which was consolidating it into the general fund. Initially, based on, again, our revenue projections, which had included the adopted fee increases that the Board of Selectmen has done over recent months. Again, without making that change to the staff position, we were looking at about a $90,000 deficit in the fund. That's a substantially smaller deficit than we've had over the last few years, but nonetheless still a deficit, and needing to address that. So again, we would have, with this transfer to the general fund, an impact of a little under $30,000 to the general fund. We also did an analysis, which will be part of the full report and recommendations we're going to be bringing to you on sort of the Parks and Rec Department and improvements and challenges with the revenue fund. We identified about $340,000 in what we would characterize as community use expenses that were essentially being paid for by program users. And that's even things like just basic support of the building itself. So, you know, things even like cleaning supplies, toiletries for the bathrooms. Right now, the general taxpayer is not supporting that out at the Simsbury Farms building. Right now, that is entirely being supported by program fees. So that was something we had talked about at the budget workshop in quite a bit of detail.
Okay, I hear that, but if you take what we spent on Parks and Rec or budgeted in the 18-19 year budget year, and showed revenue, some was in the fund, some was not, and the total expenses in the fund, not, and you compare that to the revenue that is in the 1920 budget, all across, how does that look? And where would I find that in the book?
Yeah, I think that's right.
You just want to see it in comparison to last year?
Every time,
Okay. So, it's tab 8.
okay?
So look at tab.
I mean, we're trying to get a handle on how this budget is different from next year, because what we ultimately end up doing is setting a tax rate for the taxpayers, which they will immediately compare to what they paid last year.
Right.
And we could spend hours doing all of this, but we want transparency, we're all for that. But synthesis and analysis of, you know, on a like-kind basis would be so helpful here.
So at the end of the day, Rob, it's a $30,000 difference.
What's that?
It's a $30,000 difference.
Totally lost in all of this.
Okay.
And
I mean-
would have been very helpful,
Well,
right?
You can blame that on me. I apologize for that. I mean, at the end of the day, the 4.75 increase, and this is what I wanted to get us to, is a $975,479 difference. So on a year-over-year, apples-to-apples basis, the Board of Selectmen is proposing that we spend $975,000 more.
Okay.
Of that, we talked about negotiated salaries, which at this point we cannot change, healthcare increases, et cetera. So at the end of the day, the only thing that we are asking for from an improvement basis is $77,392, which is the position up there, the $53,000, the library and the economic development study. And that does not account for offsetting it with the bottom cuts. And then if you take the contingency reserve of $264,807 on an apples-to-apples basis, if you were to cut the $77,000, which we're not recommending, we're asking for, and the contingency, the lowest you get us down to is $633,279. So on a year-over-year basis, we're talking about $975,000 change. When we've done all the accounting, all the revenues, all of the offsets. No games, no hiding anything, that is the true year-over-year. And we can provide all the schedules and all the backup to get us that. It's the same question as we asked at our budget hearings, the same questions we talked about today. We pushed town staff on. We vetted this issue substantially because we understand the same as you. We're not looking to pass a massive tax increase on either. But again, when we've got all these distracting items from the years past and how do we account for this and how do we do this, I'm hoping that this is the last time both of our boards have to do this from a discussion and we can move forward with it. It's no fault of anybody. There's been a different way to account for
No,
this stuff in the
and-
past. Just trying to move forward from it. And I know it's difficult to understand, but again, we spent a substantial amount of time as well trying to unravel this.
So we're looking at about I got from Amy and Senator Rob, I asked for a big picture year to year, and we're about 1.4 million over Board of Finance guidance, so year to year, and that includes both budgets, and that includes some of the health stuff, and it includes the teacher pension contribution, so there are some
This is what
certainly
it's-
extenuating things, but I think
Is that the same
the
thing?
first time you see that number, it's quite a bit over guidance. I mean, we've never been that much over guidance without a crisis at the state level. So that's, I think, what we're trying to grapple with. And there are reasons for some of it. Some of it is the health, some of the teacher pension. We'll get into that too. But I think initially, without some of the background information, it can be a little jarring.
Yep. Absolutely. You know, honestly, I mean, it took me a lot longer than it took you guys to even begin to comprehend this, because, you know, sitting in an 8-hour budget hearing, having discussions with these folks, et cetera, these are not easy topics to digest. I totally get it. But honestly, as I sat and tried to put a slide together, there was no way I could tell you this in a slide other than to have the conversation with you.
Okay,
That's the operating budget for now.
all right, so before we go into capital and CNR, let's go back and ask the questions we may have skipped over while we're on the operating.
Because I think we want to go back and talk about whether we really want to do this Parks and Rec thing.
Yeah, so let's stay on the Parks and Rec. And discuss as a board and get your feedback on whether this is the right thing to do or not. And recognizing, maybe just go back and talk about why it was set up in the first place and see if some of those motivations still are possible or whether this is the best thing to do. And I guess I'll start and then I'll ask Linda, who has a lot of history with this too. I think one of the things that at least I hear from the people who are very invested in the golf course and the men's club and the like is that the golf course does generate revenue, and it does have and in their view, a profit, that they would like to at least have some discretion over maintaining the golf course and enhancing it and the like. And that was part of the motivation, as I understand it, at the beginning for this special revenue fund. And then other things got added to it, like the other programs, some of which are profitable, some of which are not. And then ultimately overhead from the town that changed what was a cash flow item. Back to your point, which is, and we had this discussion just about every year, that providing parks and recreation and culture is a benefit that the town taxpayers and residents should enjoy and that we want to have as part of our quality of life, and it doesn't always have to be offset by use fees. So we have a salad already, fruit salad already, the two different things. So I'm just concerned that if we move it all the way back in, how do we get that original concept of having the people who are most invested in the golf course, just to put a name on it. It could be the same about the summer programs and all the rest, where they can set the price, improve the product, and try to use the long-term benefits of that effort to improve, to maintain and sustain the property. Do we still get that if we pull it all the way in? And the complaint is, I'll say it out loud, is that now inside the fund, they go on a list for capital improvement projects that has to compete with everybody else in town. The trails, the water and sewer department, the new fire engine, that's a bad example, but because that's a different pot of money, but
Stay away from that.
you know what I mean, but a big capital project like an irrigation system all of a sudden becomes a big deal. Now, that probably is always going to be on the town, but wanting to fix the traps and, charge a surcharge for some of this stuff, they need to as you mentioned earlier, they need to know that that money is in a lockbox or can be used for its intended purpose. So that's not even really a question, just a speech, but
If I could just tag along
Yeah.
that. So I agree with you that that is the attempt to preserve here, because the taxpayers are paying for the debt issuance of the golf course today. The golf course is not paying for its own debt, and there's reasons for that, et cetera.
Fair
I'm not
enough.
suggesting that gets passed on to the golf course. But we can talk about, yes, they're operating at a profit, sans debt. So I'll argue that from a business standpoint, they're not making money because we do not force their debt service payment on there, and they have been prioritized with the rest of capital as long as I've been on the Board of Selectmen. That has not changed, nor is it going to change here. We're trying to provide them an additional protection. We need to preserve that additional surcharge. That is no question, and that has not changed from a priority standpoint from our board or anyone else's board. And if we give them that special revenue fund for just those capital items, again, I think it'll still have to go through your board for approval, but again, we can siphon off, or we can compartmentalize that money so that it is protected and not subject to our board or our changes. That's not changing, but if we leave the special revenue fund, we're gonna fight about the deficit, but we still prioritize their capital, the taxpayers are still paying for their debt service, whether there's a special revenue fund or not.
Well, so I've said for many years, we need to go back and fix what's in the special revenue fund, because it got larded up with stuff that doesn't belong there, which makes it look like it's not breaking even. I don't know if it is or it isn't, if we did a proper allocation of town hall overhead that doesn't really belong in that fund. But I do think that there's some value to keeping it as a separate fund, and there is evidently under GASB, which Lisa kindly pointed out to me, a definition of special revenue funds, and capital is never in there. It's all about operating costs.
So I was just trying to confirm that, to make sure I had that right, and I don't know that I do, so if I missed, I was just trying to find that, and I couldn't find it as you were talking, so just to confirm that, because I knew you were going, but I'll let you continue.
But the theory, whether it's in GASB or not, makes sense that on an operating basis, you want them to break. I mean, that's kind of how the history of how the place was established. And but I think we just, I worry that if we blend it all into a department, that you also will, and I am a big fan, I think they need more money, and there's no reason that we shouldn't subsidize. Every other park in town doesn't break even, and the town spends money on them. I have no problem spending money on the parks. People love Simsbury Farms. It's a huge, huge positive for this town. So we need to get over the idea that it's terrible that they don't break even if they don't. I'm totally with you there. But then let's, be explicit about what the subsidy amount is, and continue to give them an incentive to work within an operating budget that, they're gonna try their best to break even. Once it gets blended in with another, a whole other slew of other things, I just think it would get a little bit lost. Maybe you won't be paying as close attention to, well, should we be raising fees, or, asking for higher swimming pool fees, or other than just golf, That's not a criticism at all, but, what you don't measure, you don't stay on top of.
And it's a fair concern, and our board did discuss, would we be able to still account for the expenditures down there and still work with Tom, and the answer was yes. Future boards, if they pay attention, you're right, there is a risk there.
It's gonna disappear.
The challenge from our side as well is we looked at this, and what is it, 8 out of the last 10 years, this fund has operated in a deficit, and I believe there's a GASB that says you're not allowed to have a revenue fund operating in a deficit on a perpetual basis, so we've got competing GASBs here.
So, GASB does say, yes, to a degree, you can do some transfers. If it gets too big a transfer, that it stops being a special revenue fund. Like the library, I don't see Lisa here, but they have revenues coming in. It's clearly not enough to cover expenses, so that's not a special revenue fund. This is close. I mean, we're at the line where you might say, are we still a special revenue fund or are we not? And I don't know what that number is, but But GASB does sort of say if you're infusing it with too much, it's not a special revenue fund, but you can put some in because of the changes that happen in a lot of special revenue funds, which are weather dependent.
I would just advocate that we re-enliven the little group that unfortunately only seemed to meet once, and then we kind of, I don't know what happened, but disappeared, and make some final decisions about, proper allocations. And
Yeah, on whose authority do we do this? Is this something the Board of Selectmen have the authority to do? Who established the revenue fund?
That would be
in
the
first
Board of
place?
Finance.
the
Board of
finance.
Finance?
This is a recommendation from our board to yours.
Okay,
And I
all right.
understand the same charter powers are supplied here for the revenue fund as otherwise. Again, Linda, I agree with you. The challenge is in the past, we came to a different decision, and the budgetary pressures didn't allow us to put it in. We weren't willing to pass along the tax increase to fix the fund. So it all sounds good at subcommittee, and then we have to put $250,000 into the Board of Selectmen budget, and it gets cut. And I'm concerned that that's where we're going to continue to end up again. So we
But
put
blending it
90,000 in.
together doesn't get you the extra money you need. I mean, we just need.
This eliminates the need for the extra money because we're no longer accounting for it as a special revenue fund with this need to have it break even. By putting it in, it's just a recommendation, it's an option.
It doesn't actually increase their revenue. It doesn't increase the money.
It's not their revenue, it's the town of Simsbury.
Right, but one way or the other, the numbers have to add together. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess our argument is they no longer do if you do this. You can choose to look at the revenue side as you levy the mill rate and decide, all right, are we, as we're debating this annually, are we holding up our end of the bargain from a fee standpoint, and are the revenues coming in that are commensurate with your expectations? If there's not, you can hold us accountable for that on a budgetary basis. Again, there's lots of ways to do this, but we thought, again, this, in my opinion, eliminates this isn't a business, this is recreation, and some of us, myself included, have treated it like a business, and I want to stop doing that. I want to treat it like recreation and move forward with Mr. Chairman, I need 3% more of an increase for recreation this year versus that I set the golf fees exactly at $1 more to bring in I don't know, because it rained 4 days in June.
So I would just add, I did find a special revenue, so it's GASB 54, paragraph 30. It says that it's not included for debt service or capital projects, so thank you, but I just wanted to confirm that. But one of the things special revenue funds are used for is to account for and report the proceeds of specific revenue sources that are restricted or committed to expenditures for specific purposes. And the reason why this GASB direction exists is because they felt special revenue funds were a more transparent, ironically, way of accounting for sources like that. And because what you don't want to do is have Mrs. Smith over here paying for Johnny's camp. Right, you want that to be, you pay for the camp to subsidize it. You do want Mrs. Smith paying for the playground and for the pool and, the community uses of it. So that was a way. I did talk to Amy, and she said either way of the three options, she is very talented and can do the accounting. So it doesn't matter sort of how we do it. I'm inclined with you, Linda, not to make a major change like this until we have the report. It doesn't make sense until we've seen the final report, to me, but it doesn't mean we can't do it at a future date.
The report is
But the analysis of what they're working on that I
Okay.
thought we were going to have for this, but it looks like it's taking a little bit longer. Surprised because it's taken us probably 2 decades to figure this out. So I'm not surprised it's taken a little longer than we thought. But
so I think that's what we should do, but does that give us a problem with the budget? Huh?
Switch the numbers back.
Put the numbers back into the fund? Okay. So I think that's what we should do. That'd be my recommendation.
I second that.
Okay? All right.
do you need a motion for that?
So you just want to break it back out the way it was, not include, keep Parks and Rec in the general fund, put Simsbury Farms back where it was in Simsbury Farms, no change.
And if we have, right, and if you need a transfer to keep it solvent, then that should be a line item also, right?
Well, you have the 100,000 still general fund contribution, right? That's still included, that we've done over a year. The question we have, I guess, that Rob's asking, that I'm asking is that enough based on comparison from last year? And if not, why didn't we budget for that?
No, that would be, all of the consolidated
it does take care of. It was about, with making the staffing change, it was a little under $30,000 that the fund would have still had a deficit without the general fund picking up some of the community use expenditures. So if we go back to having them in both locations, we'll be in a situation of the special revenue fund being in a deficit position of, again, a little under 30,000, I believe it is.
So was there an increase to the non-special? I guess what I'm saying is there was open space expenditure, right? And if we didn't do any of these changes, is that the exact same number as it was last year? That was, whatever was in the operating budget last year, is that what would be in the budget this year? Because we haven't done negotiated union salary, so there's no salary increase in there yet, because you're negotiating. So is that number exactly the same, or has that gone up or down or lower?
I mean, some accounts, again, if there were like contractual, services that have gone up or something of that nature, again, we did our best to sort of right-size accounts if there was too much or too little in them. But there were no service enhancements, if you will, for Parks and Rec, regardless if it was a general fund account or something in the special revenue fund. Again, we did, as opposed to service enhancements in this particular area because of the deficit. We did propose the reduction of a position to try and reduce that deficit that existed.
No, and I think that's great, but I'm just wondering if, like, we were looking number to number, was there an increase in the net budget in the operating budget under Culture, Parks and Rec?
In the $900,000 increase, Sean.
There was a minor increase in the, you're talking about the parks budget that was in the general fund.
All
Yes.
in, all.
Well, I'm talking about parks
I
first,
think
and
she's,
then.
I just want to be clear what we're talking about.
I'm talking about parks
There
before.
is, it was a very small increase in, I believe below the guideline, maybe 2.3, somewhere in there, 2.3, in the parks budget. I mean, that's,
what
lining
is that?
supplies, agricultural supplies getting more expensive. Water becoming, water increases cost for water. That budget, as you guys probably know, that budget's been underfunded as well. I mean, it was kind of a shell game moving things around with that, in previous budgets with the parks. We were asked to provide a true budget as what our expenses are to maintain the parks as is. Going forward, there may be some, as we go through the Parks and Open Space Master Plan, there may be some increased expenses or benchmarking for staffing, and do certain trails need more maintenance than others. The budget we presented this year was to keep things as is, and it may have gone up for parks, 2.3% or something like that. I don't know the exact.
And that's
number.
all the operating expenses?
The previous general fund
Yes.
expenses that were in the budget last year, yes.
Oh, because that's a 2.3.
In your budget book, I think it's tab 18,
Yep.
you'll see that it has the historical data of Parks and Rec administration maintenance, and you can see the budget for fiscal year 19. There's nothing under town manager because we had moved it out, and then put it back into the general fund for Board of Selectmen, so you can see the fiscal year 19 budget compared to the fiscal year 20 budget.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a $200,000 increase, so help me understand that.
Yeah, so the Parks and Rec maintainers is 129,000 of that, so those are the two maintainers that the Board of Ed pays for.
So that's the difference in the 200? That's the,
Then there's like small increases, like 2,000.
Are you talking about the cover page? The first
No.
page?
no, I'm talking about this page? So you'll see
What's
that
the
this.
number? Give me a number on the bottom.
There's no-
674?
672.
674 was the 19 budget.
And this year's budget is 815,134.
Right.
Right,
So,
$140,000 difference.
right, so that 129 is the two maintainers from the Board of Ed that they pay for.
Say that one more time, Amy, I'm sorry.
The 129,000 is the two maintainers that the Board of Ed
Wait a
pays
minute, what's the
for.
where's the 129?
Middle column,
Oh.
actually, middle of the last column,
Middle of the
Top.
last-
where is it?
the 129,
Okay.
288.
Oh.
What-
Oh, on the full-time.
What is that
the
again?
full-time.
One more time.
That is the Board of Ed maintainers. They
True
pay for-
cost.
Yeah.
Board
true
of
cost.
Ed maintainers.
Yeah.
It's
so
the true
there's
cost,
two-
the 410 that they showed, it's not a really change in the budget. It's always been paid for.
It's the
This is
full-
what's paid for by you guys.
It's the full cost of two maintainers that are paid for by the Board of Education. So this is the true cost, the true expenditure, and then
Oh,
there's
so then I
revenue
have to go to the
offset.
revenue
Yes,
page to find the
precisely.
offset?
Yes. And it's not gonna be the entire offset, because part of the offset is gonna be employee benefits, right?
And why don't you put that in the revenue for employee benefits?
Okay, so
in the
that's
employee benefits?
129, and then the rest is the 2.3?
Yeah, I mean, you could see, if you're on that, I don't know what tab that is, there's minor increases to.
Right. Okay.
road and drainage supplies, stake, basically stakes,
Got it.
propane, things like that.
So most of this is just sort of
It's a status
an
quo.
accounting change, it's not an actual change.
Correct.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just make one recommendation? We're still prolonging this conversation, that we recommend your motion include the reconvening of that subcommittee to look
Yes.
into the revenue funds, so that that's not lost. Obviously, I'll bring it to the board of selectmen, just.
And Rob and I were talking about this today. Do you remember who was the chair of it? It's been so long since we met.
So,
I think I got that task.
Yeah, you did.
it was
I think I'm gonna turn it back over to the one that you did.
It was 2 members from Culture, Parks and Rec, 2 members from.
Yeah, we were both on it, but we couldn't remember who else was.
I was, Mike Payne was, David and Jerry Wetchy.
Jerry and myself.
Jerry Wetch.
And then I was on it previously with Nick Mason and the other
That's
aspect.
right.
That's where we recommended the.
But there was a more recent meeting than that,
That
after
was to
your
discuss
dad
the
left.
enterprise fund concept. Because at one point.
Well,
that
that
was
was the one
decided.
meeting I went to, Dave chaired and you were there, and Jerry.
So let's do that again. Dave, we'll leave you to,
Thanks, Dave,
Set
for
a date.
volunteering. Appreciate that.
Happy for you to show up.
Yeah.
Rob, do we need a motion?
Yeah, we
to-
do. So I think we've received a recommendation from the Board of Selectmen to fold the special revenue fund into the general fund, and we need a motion to say we would prefer not to do that until we've had the, so we really, do we really need a motion to keep things the status quo? But I think we put in, let's just put in the minutes that we're not accepting their recommendation until we've had the benefit of the full facilities review and recommendation for Parks and Rec.
and Maria, when did you say you thought that would be done?
Well, we're hoping to wrap it up soon. There's 2 different studies right now. So we're doing an analysis of the financial management fees,
Program participation, benchmarking data. There's that particular analysis that we're doing in-house at a staff level in regards essentially to the special revenue fund. Then there's a separate project we have going on. We're just about to enter into a contract for the Parks and Open Space Master Plan that was funded a number of years ago in the capital budget. So that will really help, I think, shape and frame, again, our capital planning for parks for, the next 20 years, as well as better understanding our service level needs. So we've kind of got, that study is much more long-term. That I think will take about a year to
I
complete.
think that one we don't need, but it'd be good to get the first one and then meet. And then kind of
Okay.
act on what those recommendations are. Does that
So-
make sense?
Yeah, so this is not a motion, it's just a statement for the minutes. And what comes with that is to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Just took them apart.
Yeah, all right. Actually, you have to take them apart, I think. All right, so we'll do that, all right?
Again, it was just a recommendation on how to look at this.
I understand.
And then the second part of do we need a motion to reconvene the subcommittee to look at it?
I don't think we have to. I mean, it's
Okay.
an open committee. It can just meet.
Yeah.
Well, technically, it stopped.
It
It
was never
It was an
officially
ad hoc.
closed.
I'll go with Eric on that, right? Eric, isn't it an ad hoc?
Just meet.
I think we have to appoint it in that, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have to reappoint it.
Remember at our next meeting?
Okay.
And the-
It can be the same members,
Yeah.
but technically,
Robin
as
and I
ad
will do it.
hocs have to be appointed every election cycle.
The last thing I would say on the issue is, though, is when this comes back around with a solution, let's all remember we had this conversation, please, because we've done this, and we didn't take the solution the last time. So, we need to implement the solution when we do this, and it's not necessarily going to be a big number for the Board of Selectmen budget or the town overall. There's going to be cost for the taxpayers.
What does that mean? Say that again, yeah. I missed
We
it.
recommended $180,000 go into the Board of Selectmen budget in the past to solve this problem. That was rejected by the Board of Finance, and only $90,000 went in. So the $90,000 contingency transfer that you see, which is now 100, was chopped because the number wasn't, they didn't want to pass it on to the taxpayers. So there was a solution that theoretically would have closed the gap in prior years, including this coming year, that was rejected. So all I'm cautioning on is when we have the solution in the future, let's all follow through on it.
Noted.
We've already done this.
Got it.
million at it. And then
Didn't
remember.
actually reallocate.
So this is, I think this is our opportunity then to talk about other things, changes in the operating budget that, all right, before we go on to capital. So can we talk about police overtime? And maybe Nick can help us with this, but, you know, in the context that, I don't know how many years ago, we added the 2 additional patrol officers. And one of the ways we did that was to justify the fact that overtime had grown to a point where it almost made sense to have full-time. And I think we had the benefit of lower overtime for 2 or 3 years, or a couple of years anyway after that, but now it's back up to where we're under budgeting it. I think we may have under budgeted to make sure that the budget didn't show that we, you know, it was a budgeting thing rather as opposed to expenses. But maybe someone can speak to sort of the fundamental need for overtime. We can't, I mean, could we manage to zero overtime? The answer to that is probably no, right? But help us understand why it needs to go up every year and why there aren't alternatives to the scheduling that could be done that could, you know, save us, because it's more expensive than regular time.
Do you want to start? Okay.
So, I don't know how many years we can go back. I don't know off the top of my head how many years we have under budgeted, but I believe it's pre.
I have it.
This is our job.
Okay,
We're a
so,
bunch of green eye shades up here. I said we're a bunch of green eye shades up here.
so, I think that's much longer than FY '16, which is when,
They can't, just a second, let me get a mic so everyone can read.
great, thank you. I think it's much further back than FY '16, which is the year that we had the 2 more officers. And I don't believe that the only reason to add those 2 officers in fiscal
No, I
year 16
didn't say
was
that.
to save
That's-
on overtime.
no.
So there was a clear need for that. And if we look at, you know, one way to look at how many officers we need in a community is a ratio of the number of officers per 1,000 residents. And that's sort of a measure that's used nationwide. We're at 1.5 to 1.6 officers per 1,000 residents. The Connecticut average is 1.8 to 1.9. Our region is 1.8 to 1.9. Nationally, it's the same thing. So if you're looking at that alone, we are understaffed by 5 to 7 officers. I would not say that's the sole thing we should look at for the number of officers. We live in a very good community with some really strong values. We have a low crime rate. I think there's several reasons for that, but I don't think we need to be up to that number necessarily, or look at it just solely that way. One of the reasons why overtime continues to grow is we do have a minimum staffing of 3 officers per shift. But salaries go up every year, and then our services expand every year. There's different things that we do that we did not do, you know, years before. For example, right now we have 2 lieutenants. Those lieutenants are investigating anytime we use force, which we never did in the past. We had sergeants investigate it, or it was done sort of after the fact. These lieutenants are now coming out to the scene to investigate. So there's a greater transparency. It increases our professionalism, reduces our liability. We have the information at our hands right away. So that's just one thing that has changed. Another thing that is a significant impact on overtime is we've never had staff meetings. We've never had regular staff meetings. So we implemented this back in September, where we have all the sergeants and the lieutenants meet. They work various shifts, and they have days off during the week. It's not a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, where everybody is working that's at that staff level that can come during their workday. So a lot of that is overtime. So we're looking at, 100 some odd, so I have it right here. Estimated 200 hours of overtime each year to have staff meetings once a month. That's a lot. But we've already seen the significant impact of that. We have our first-line supervisors more in line with what the administration wants to get done. They're more in line with our mission statement. Our service, quality of service, I believe, is improving. So I think it's a necessary thing.
Nick, is that a 4-hour pay that you have to do when you do the overtime for the
Yes.
staff meeting?
Yes, so
For
it's
how
a-
long is the meeting?
So they stay for 4 hours, or they put in for the actual time. So they come in, it's a 4-hour, and we've been having them at 8 AM, so, because we have more of the officers, or more of the sergeants, I should say, working at that time, because we'll have 2 working during the day, and then we have a training sergeant and a detective sergeant, so you're dealing with 4 already working. And then we hold over from C Squad, the midnight shift. So they either stay for the 4 hours and get the 4 hours, or they leave after the meeting and they only get paid for the actual time. So they're working with us on that, and we're actually getting the full.
So they only get paid for actual time? I thought our contract mandated a minimum of 4.
If you get called in. So the sergeants who are working that midnight shift, they're not getting called in. If 1 or 2 work that midnight shift, they ended at 7 o'clock, they're still on the books and they're working from 7 to 8. So it's a regular, it's not a 4-hour minimum for them.
Okay.
If the officer's not scheduled to work, say they're working 3 o'clock later that day, they're coming in at a 4-hour minimum. They can leave early, but they're not going to get that minimum. So I think there's several reasons. Obviously, a wage increase will impact the amount of overtime, but there are a lot of things that we can't necessarily predict. And I'll give you one example. We had the homicide investigation last fall.
Sure.
That 2.5-week period or so cost us about $13,000 in overtime alone, just for that one period. So if we look back at what are the overtime drivers, it's vacation time, it's comp time, that we're now backfilling shifts. It's going to those domestic calls, those accidents that happen after our shift, after a shift ends. So somebody works from 7 to 3 and an accident comes in at 2:30, they're covering that accident until that accident ends. It doesn't make any sense for efficiency reasons and effectiveness to then hand that off halfway through to somebody else. So we have a lot of that's accounting for that. We have training that accounts for overtime. So there's a bunch of categories, and we look at all of these. And that's really those are the driving factors for the overtime and why that goes up every year. Some years obviously are worse than others as far as the amount of sick time or injury time or workers' comp time and having to fill those positions. We don't have to backfill every position in the police department, but just those that are on patrol that fall under the minimum staffing levels.
Nick, has the police department overall budget, ever been over budget in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years?
Not that I'm aware of, no. No, but
So you've been
the
able to
overtime
find-
has.
Yes, but you've been able to find savings within your bottom line budget to deal with the vicissitudes of
We have,
overtime.
yeah. So it's not very often that we're able to sustain, 38 full-time sworn police officers, whether it's retirements or somebody leaves, we have vacancies, and we've been able to manage it that way. It's not ideal, because we don't have the personnel out there, and it's costing us a little bit in overtime, and, it kind of taxes.
But it's netted out, so you've never
is.
been over budget.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's part of the art of budgeting, is trying to figure out
Yes.
how, if everything came as you thought, maybe you'd be over budget, but there's always something that's sort of,
There
the
has
question is, is that changing? And it may be, but it may not be. So that's the sort of, I look at the overall budget and have you been able to meet your budget, even with the overtime going up? And the answer is yes, because other things have happened. And so that's sort of goes into a little bit of my calculation.
Yeah, and I understand that, but we're hoping to be able to manage our vacancies better and be more efficient at filling those, because we do work much better with, a fully staffed.
So, but if you're fully staffed, I would expect the overtime to go down, right?
No, not necessarily, because those are not all positions that are out on the road and that are backfilled if somebody's using a vacation day or a comp day or anything like that. There's a lot of positions that are not. I want to say about 12 or 13 are not. So that wouldn't really help with the overtime necessarily. It will help a lot, and I'll give you one instance. We put an additional sergeant assigned to the day shift, and we started that 1.5 years or 2 years ago. And every month we look at how much overtime is being used on A Squad during the day, or how much is being saved. And because of that additional sergeant on days, we were able to prevent 34 shifts, 8-hour shifts of overtime this fiscal year
That's great.
alone. And overall, they're down, and it fluctuates anywhere from 9%, it was up at one point over 20% savings because of that additional sergeant. It does vary, because there are so
Sure.
few of them.
What is your target paid overtime hours?
For, overall, for police, or?
And in 2018, you had mentioned that they were, you were targeting 2,500. The
Right.
prior year, it had been 3,400. So what is the target these days?
Well, so it hasn't been the 2,500. And one of the reasons is because we've gone from, and I'll answer your question, but we've gone from roughly a 65 or 67% request for pay on overtime, as opposed to comp time, to now up near 80%. So the officers have a choice. When they work overtime, they can work for money, or they can work for compensatory time. And they're allowed to keep, X amount of compensatory time.
Sure.
That has gone up. 80% now of the time they're asking for money. So those paid hours are up, and we obviously have no control over their choice.
Got it.
We have a control over some of the overtime that is being offered, but very little. So, I would like to see it back down to 2,500. I don't really see that happening. I see that actually going, up further. These things
That
come up.
part of the
and-
contract, Nick?
I'm sorry?
Is that option part of the contract? Yeah.
Yes.
Just a question for Amy and Maria. So you broke out dispatch, and again, it's hard to compare apples to apples, but what's the thinking there and the transparency goal? All right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, absolutely. That was the thinking. Dispatch is, yes, it is part of the police department, but when you think about that function versus, say, the patrol function, sworn personnel versus civilian personnel, it really is a separate and distinct function. Oftentimes, it is accounted for as its own program budget. And last year, we did recall there was a lot of confusion, particularly around overtime. What's overtime for patrol? What's overtime for dispatch? It was all just lumped together. So we did our best effort this year to say, okay, for the dispatch function, what are the personnel costs? What are the costs to really run that function of the police department? And that's why we opted to try and pull that out. When you think about, again, just the size and scope of the department and all of those functions just lumped into that large budget, we really felt like that was a misnomer, and there was a perception that that entire budget was patrol, and that just really wasn't the case. And so that was our thought in terms of separating out dispatch from the patrol function.
I think it's a good idea.
So that leads to the obligatory question about shared dispatch with fire and ambulance. Are there any synergies there? I ask this every year, but.
So we do dispatch for ambulance. 100% dispatch for ambulance. And for fire, it's just the initial. We are the PSAP, we take the 911 calls and the routine calls, and we do send out the fire department. Then the fire department takes over their dispatching services. They have the locations for fire hydrants, all the fire-specific items.
Don't we have that with GIS now? I thought we incorporated the fire hydrants in our GIS system.
They may be, but it's not something that we access and let them know about. The fire department takes that over, and they keep track of all that.
Should we be accessing that?
Well, we can.
We don't need to because we have the
We have a
redundancy?
direct line to them, both by
Okay.
radio and by telephone, dedicated line, so if we need that information, we can get that very easily.
Okay, can we?
Just, so what is the total impact of last year? I mean, this goes to Rob's question, right?
Yeah.
90% of the questions are gonna get it, how can we relate it from last year to this year? So what's the budget increase from if you broke it out, so is it like 3.7%, or is it,
Police department specific?
yes?
Sure. So the major cost drivers for the police department budget, again, Sean.
What's the
had-
percentage
Oh,
increase?
the percentage increase,
Yep.
sorry.
It's not there. You have to add the dispatch and the police together, and it.
Subtract
it
out
hasn't
the-
done it, and then take out the
Right,
what?
so it's like a $170,000 increase?
Yeah,
So-
on the combined number of those two
Right.
expenses.
The chief has it
which doesn't
handy,
show.
thank you.
So putting them back together,
Right,
It's a total of a 4.28%
Right,
increase, putting both police and dispatch back together.
right.
And just a comment on a bit of that. I sort of separated in salary or contractual, and then, the regular operating, sort of the line items that we see. And the line items were down 3.88%, down almost $11,000. So that's in the regular daily operating. But it's the salaries and it's the overtime and the contractual obligations where.
Right, but you just moved it from the full-time, right? Took the dispatch out, which was down by $346,000, and just moved it down to the dispatch, right?
Right.
Right, so, but the net increase is a 4.2% increase to the budget.
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Maria, when you did this budget, did you take out the contingency, did you change the contingency line item and incorporate the union contract settlement in this budget that we're seeing here? Or is it all in the contingency still?
Contingency. Yeah, it's budgeted in contingency, but I did just want to clarify, I'm sorry, back to Kevin's point, if I could. So, yes, we did on the full-time salaries, right, we did take out the dispatch, but there was still an increase to the full-time budget, particularly the police department, per their CBA, they do have the ability to step, so we do have a number of officers that are still eligible for step increases, which are separate from the GWI, and that was about a $126,000 increase to the full-time salary for our sworn personnel.
So of the 170, 126 is a step. Is
Step
that what you're saying?
increases. Yes, right.
Thank
right.
you.
And Maria, why didn't we take the settlement and put it in this budget if it's settled?
Sure. So we, the Board of Selectmen just actually voted on the TA at their most recent meeting. So again, everything was still confidential at that point. We were working through the ratification process with the union, ratification process with the
So
Board of
the
Selectmen.
next question I have is, did you come out better than what you reserved for contingency or worse?
I think we were right about on target, actually. Again, we were looking at negotiated settlement data across the state. CCM does a great job of tracking that, and so we had a pretty good sense, I think.
So there's no savings there is what you're
No,
getting?
no,
Okay.
we came right about where we had expected. And we are just about to execute the agreement, so we will be moving forward with implementation of the agreement over the next few weeks.
So just, there is a line item for contingencies, which includes an increase in the salaries that are in this budget.
Right, right.
So when the settlement is made, the contingency number will go to zero, and this number will go up by the contingency number?
The contingency number also includes potential settlements with our other groups that have contracts
All
coming due
right,
as well.
let's say for $100,000 of it was for police.
There was a portion allocated
All
for
right,
police.
so when we add in the $100,000, is this still 4.28%, Nick, or is it 4.9, or?
It would be higher than the 4.28.
Okay. All right. I've never been comfortable with the way we do the contingency thing because it doesn't get distributed, and it's like a 100% increase from last year because we said it was zero. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then, but it all
Actually
gets in,
flows
it sort of masks what's actually happening on those contracts that are unsettled. Because there's never a reconciliation with what Lisa just asked you, which is, here's what we thought we would have to pay, this is what we ended up paying. Or we start with, this year's contingency is 200,000, last year's contingency was 200,000. But we're comparing, do you see what I'm saying?
Well, maybe I'm not quite following, because it really depends on the number of contracts that are settled or unsettled. In some cycles, our contingency might be very little.
Let me ask it a different way, maybe make my point. When this is all said and done, 4.28 doesn't cover the increase,
Correct.
and it doesn't show in our budget. It shows in the contingency line.
We're next year, right? Next year, because the contracts are settled.
And when we go to do next year, the budget item for the 1920 budget for contingency will be zero. And we'll have a $200,000 to settle next year's unsettled. Do you see how that's confusing?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I look back today, I mean, we budgeted a contingency basis anywhere from 30,000 to 215,000.
So sometimes when I did the budgets with the Board of Selectmen, we would budget a 1 or a 1.5 in this budget. So you would see part of it, because we figured we were now.
I think that's a better way to do it, honestly.
And then do the contingency for the rest.
Put it out and call it a contingency, but put it in the budget, put the contingency, and I know you don't want to do that because that's too transparent to the people who are negotiating with. And I get that. But
But there's some base number you could put in. The compromise is to put in a little bit. You know you're not coming in at zero, so you could have put in, you can put in one.
Okay.
Or maybe you're
That's
aiming
enough,
for
I guess.
zero.
Can I just ask, next year when we look at the actuals, will the line items be net of the contingency, or are we gonna show an increase over what the number is here? We'll see, because if you compare it from 17, 18, 18, 19, 19,
It will show
20,
the-
is it getting is it,
You won't see it in contingency.
so it'll
Actual.
it'll, yeah.
that's my point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we would recommend bringing the salary transfers to you upon, you know,
Just trying to get to that crystal clear transparency.
Then the increases are then based on the the updated amount, and then the increase doesn't look big year over year because you've applied the contingency to that line item. So it's not apples to apples.
So just one more question. So the dispatch is separate. How come there's no total for the total police department and the dispatch? There's,
It should have been there.
right, were we just missing a total for the combined? Or am I just not looking at it right?
Oh, if I'm understanding correctly, so you'd like to see a total for the police unit, the dispatch unit, animal control, and emergency management, just a grand total for those 4 program budgets?
Right, I don't know what page this is, but it's just.
Well, it's under tab 13.
Right, it says fiscal 2019 police department
It's the
expenditure
second
budgets.
Second page with numbers on it.
Right,
Should have a total down at the bottom
should have a total down at the bottom.
for expenditures. Yeah,
No, I don't,
and that would be true.
I don't think it's been presented that way in the past within the.
There was
depart-
no breakout of dispatch, so
Right.
wouldn't we want to total the two?
I think you have it in the
Well,
expenditure budget.
in the very beginning, under the expenditure summary, but in the departmental pages, we didn't present that information that way, but we can do it differently next year. Yeah. It's always been separate.
If you go to tab 3, Kevin, you'll find it there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the summary of all the operating. Consistent.
Yeah, there it is. That's the 4.23.
Yeah. Which is really 4.8 or whatever.
All right, do we have other items in the Board of Selectmen's budget that we wish to address individually?
Yes.
How about it?
I mean, I would just like to have a year-over-year comparison.
I think we said that.
Okay, I have a couple of specifics if nobody else does. Tab 28, the second page of it shows, I think was trying to make the year-to-year comparison a little bit clearer. And at the bottom of the page, it says, well, you could remove all these different things, and then it would look a little more like apples to apples. And a couple of those things are under budgeted Social Security. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Lisa and I went back and kind of recreated years of how much we've put into Social Security, and it's a little mysterious to me. Like, FY16 was half of what was every other year, so I have no idea what happened there. But I didn't quite understand FY19 was budgeted at 780, and your re-estimate of it is 760, so actually under budget, but the proposed is 829, and then the Board of Selectmen increased it to 958. So can you tell me about those numbers?
Yeah,
Do you want to start? Do you want me-
either way. Okay, can we start like one at a time? All right, so the 780 for the fiscal year 19 is the same as the budget for fiscal year 18. So they were both at 780,000. Now, just conceptually, you have your, any staffing of the new hires, which we know we had an abundance of in fiscal year 19 that you have to plan for. You have your step increases, you have your, any change in part-time hours. So you know year over year, just based on step increases and raises alone, that number has to increase.
It actually did. FY '18 was 765, FY '19 was 780.
I have to look. But anyways, I ran out what the actual salaries were, or should have been, took out their medical, and then multiplied it by the Social Security and FICA rate. So in this year, we got lucky in fiscal year 19 that there was so much turnover that there was savings in that line item. But had there not been, and how positions been filled all year long, we would have been over budget in that line item.
I would just say, when I talked with Maria earlier today, and I noticed, and Linda, thank you for helping me figure this out, but there was a discrepancy in our budget books, saying what we budget. Linda's saying the 700s, but when you go to the CAFR and you look at Social Security, it actually is at a higher number. That is, they do budgeted original, budget final, and then actuals, and those are different. So I asked Maria to look into that. I don't know if you had time to look into that and
We
what you
did.
came up with.
We responded to that. If you look on that budgeted page, your original is going to match what was approved via referendum. Your final is your true up to match what happened in actual. And I sent you the schedule that we sent to the auditors. And unfortunately, they put Social Security, but my schedule says Social Security, life, and disability. So that $800,000 number includes your life insurance and your disability in addition to your Social Security. It's not just your Social Security. And if you total your budget numbers for your life, your disability, and your Social Security, you'll tie back to the CAFR.
Okay, so I did not receive that.
Right, it was pretty late in the day. We
Okay.
were working on it. I think we probably just sent it around maybe 5 or so.
So the proposed number, the 829,000 proposed by the town manager and the 958 proposed by the Board of Selectmen
Includes
actually
something else?
includes life and disability?
No, that is just Social Security. It's just the CAFR that combined them.
So why are those two numbers so much higher than what was the estimated amount for this current year?
So the Social Security for the town manager's budget, remember, we took all of Parks and Rec out of the general fund and put it into the Simsbury Farms Fund. And then we put Simsbury Farms and the Board of Selectmen budget back into the general fund. So there's that increase, and then I think there was a slight increase for the library hours and then the accounting position.
So it's not
And
apples to apples.
so,
It has more employees.
why
Has
this
more
is so
employees.
difficult. So that's what made you go up to 829, and what made the Board of Selectmen add even more, or?
No, they
No.
didn't.
Combine the
Oh, no, that was the, moving the employees from the fund over.
So the big bump was from this, okay, but so then why was your recommendation to go up by $69,000?
Right, again, that goes back to Amy's point that if we did not have so much unanticipated movement this year, with retirements in particular, we would have been over budget for current year on that particular line item. So again, looking at our position control and what we have for approved positions and anticipated salaries for those approved positions, that's why we had suggested the increase. And again, that is Social Security and our Medicare contribution. But again, we also backed out, the medical contributions are done on a pre-tax basis. So it's essentially the salaries.
Okay, so
You
you're
take
just
out that.
expecting a lot less turnover this year?
Right. I mean, it was, again, we did have a large amount of retirements, many of which we did not know during budget development. So in that regard, we were very fortunate, because otherwise we would have been over budget on that particular
So if
account.
we've been over budgeted all these years, how come we never had to do a transfer to make up for the loss? I mean, under budgeted.
I don't know if we've been under budgeted all these years, just in fiscal year 19.
Just fiscal year 19. Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay.
This discussion, we didn't think it was prudent to budget for anything what the improved position.
I just wasn't understanding.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Then I had a question on tab 5, and actually did talk about some of this with Amy today, but I still am struggling to understand this better, and I'm suspecting my colleagues may also be a little confused. So you showed us that on the page that has this little spreadsheet on it, it shows public agency support of $52,448 for both what the Board of Selectmen recommended and what the town manager recommended. And then the very next page is a list of a whole bunch of community agencies. What Amy explained to me, that actually all of these community agencies, because these numbers that are added up here don't add to $52,000, that most of these are actually not in this tab. The Interval House, the Farmington Valley VNA, the Mental Health Board, and the Meals on Wheels, the last four are off in social services, some other tab. And where does Main Street Partnership? I couldn't find what tab that was in.
Under economic development. So if you look at the column
tab
that says
is that?
department, economic development is tab 6.
We've always budgeted Main Street.
Yeah, I just couldn't find. So I guess I would ask in the future if you could actually put the list in the tab that it goes with. That would be a little clearer, because this was really not clear. And then there were sewer payments thrown into community agencies. That also, it doesn't, so what I learned from Amy was that the ones that say Board of Selectmen Community Services, those were rolled forward as just flat funded, because this sheet doesn't tell us which ones you chose to fund and which ones you didn't. It only shows what they got last year and what they requested, but it doesn't show what you actually are proposing. So there was no way we could add this up to come up with the numbers that you had. So those that say BOS at the beginning add up to 40,460. And then Amy indicated that there was 11,500 for the Housing Authority sewer payments, although that's actually offset somewhere else on another tab. But then there's still a missing 528, which is peanuts, but I like things to add up at the bottom, so where does that come from?
Sure. So just a couple of comments on this. The North Central EMS Council, we receive an assessment from them, very similar to how our assessment from the health district works. That's based on a per capita basis, and we have had some population growth. So we did see a very small $488 increase in our assessment. So there was a very small increase for that particular outside agency.
Okay, so it wasn't all flat funded, then there was an increase there.
Right,
Okay.
because our per cap assessment increased. The sewer payment is a little bit different. So most of these outside agencies are submitting application requests to us where they're seeking funding from us. It's very similar, almost to like a grant to an outside agency. We have a contract on file with the Housing Authority. I believe that goes back to the early 70s. And one of the things that we agreed to do at that time was to make sewer payments on behalf of the Housing Authority. That currently, based on usage over the last few years, is around $11,500 a year. So that is a payment, again, we are making on their behalf for their sewer fees. And so in terms of where to show that expenditure, since they are an outside agency, we thought that it would be best to reflect it with other outside agencies in the Board of Selectmen budget. So that, again, was
Except
just
they're not even listed.
the place
So-
that we tried to do. Well, again, it's a little different because they're not submitting an application to us for funding. We're contractually required to do that on their behalf. So it's a little
I
bit
get
of an
it, but
oddball.
just from our perspective, as we're trying to make numbers add up, if you give us a piece of paper that doesn't have some of the components on there, there's no way we can make it add up. And so then we're sitting at home going, what the heck is this about? So you could save yourself a lot of questions just by being a little clearer for next year. Okay, so that's that one. I think those were my main things. I don't know if anybody else agrees, but in a similar vein, when you've got, I understand what you're doing with wanting to show the revenue, fine. But where the revenue, particularly for staff, again, I couldn't make numbers add up because I didn't realize that you were putting in money, expenditures for both the salaries and the, actually, you're putting in expenditures only for salaries in a given tab, but showing the revenue for salaries and benefits. So in any one tab, it never added up because I didn't know the benefits were thrown in there. So if we could put the revenue in the same place, in the same tab as the expenditures, it would make the math a whole lot easier for next year. Okay, I'll shut up now.
I just asked one question, which is on the revenue tab 2. I just, my head hurt over the tax department taking out the $87.5 million. And I didn't get that.
Oh, that is your tax revenue that's collected via the mill rate.
I'm sorry.
That's your tax revenue that you get from setting the mill rate. And you haven't set the mill rate yet, so we were just showing the revenue that you're expected to get. And then
Okay.
we'll have to play with the levy sheet to come up with that number.
Just to follow up on Rob's thing, I appreciate the summary, because it's nice to see all the numbers together, but it is a different revenue breakout than we did last year. And I think what you've done, and you can correct me, is you put the revenues with each department now, right? You've broken them down, but it would be helpful so that we could do a year-to-year comparison. If we see the 9% change in general government administration, you don't know how that's broken down unless you flip to the tab, and then maybe you can see it there. But before, it used to be all in one place. It would be helpful if we could use the old format just to do a year-to-year comparison for the summary, so that we could see the breakdown within each revenue line item. Is it correct that you have them in each department?
Sure. So, again, we did take a look at our revenues, again, to try to properly place the revenues to the departments that they actually corresponded to. So things were, for lack of a phrase, they were a bit all over the place. So, again, we really took a hard look at what are our revenues, what department are the revenues actually associated with, and then put them with the departments.
So I think, 10 years from now, we're going to be really happy you did that, but we have a fiduciary duty, and part of our duty is to compare this year's budget to last year's, and to sort of see, okay, where are we doing? And so if you could just, maybe for the next meeting we have, so that we can just sort of see what the changes were, it would just sort of help us meet our fiduciary duty.
We look for outliers.
Right,
We look for
precisely.
increases that are higher than the average. We look for numbers that are bigger than they matter, so we can focus on the important dollars and the areas where things are changing. And it was very hard to do that out of this book, almost impossible, so. Okay? Got it? Anything else specific, though, about the expenditures that are being recommended?
So I'll just say, I just want to commend both Maria and Amy. I called both of them numerous times, as you're getting an idea here. So I actually have less questions than everyone else, because I called you guys in advance and went through a number of questions. And Maria, we went rapid fire today, and it was very helpful to sort of get those numbers in advance. So I want to, first of all, thank you for your patience and for your explanations, and that it was very helpful. And I just do want to mention that, because I'm not asking questions today, because I've actually already asked and had a lot of them answered. So I just want to recognize you for that, and thank you for that.
We all feel that way. It doesn't sound like it today, but we do. All right, so shall we,
Take a break.
Yes,
Yeah.
if I will break.
let's do that. Let's take a 5-minute break. You could have sat down, Sean, but all we have,
Now you tell them.
all we have left is the capital, which should be no problem. And our response to the 4.75 increase.
Right.
Right.
So let's take a 5-minute break. Can we do that?
Yes,
And then
thank you.
we'll come right back. All right.